The rain battered the windows of the old diner, a relentless drumbeat that drowned out the world beyond. Ethan Carter sat alone in a corner booth, his fingers tracing the edge of a chipped coffee mug, his wedding suit hanging in a hotel room 10 miles away. Tomorrow, he would marry Sarah Sweet. Dependable Sarah, but tonight, his heart was a storm no ring could tame. He was 28, a graphic designer with a life carefully mapped out in the small town of Willow Creek, Pennsylvania. His dark hair was slightly tousled, his hazel eyes clouded with a restlessness he couldn't name. The diner, with its faded checkered floor and flickering neon sign, felt like a time capsule, pulling him back to a past he'd tried to bury. He hadn't been here in years. Not since high school. Not since the boy who'd once made his heart race sat across from him in this very booth. The bell above the door jingled, and Ethan's breath caught. A man stepped inside, shaking rain from his jacket, his short-cropped hair glinting under the dim lights. Lucas Hayes, 29, broad-shouldered and carrying the quiet confidence of someone who'd faced the world and come out stronger. His blue eyes scanned the room, landing on Ethan with a flicker of recognition that felt like a spark in the dark. "Ethan Carter," Lucas said, his voice low, carrying the weight of a decade apart. He slid into the booth, uninvited but not unwelcome, his presence filling the space like oxygen to a flame. "Didn't expect to see you here the night before your big day." Ethan's smile was tight, caught between nostalgia and unease. "Didn't expect to be here either," he admitted, his fingers tightening around the mug. "Just needed a moment, I guess." Lucas leaned back, studying him. The years had etched faint lines around his eyes, but they were the same eyes that had once looked at Ethan like he was the only person in the world. High school had been a blur of stolen glances, late-night talks, and a single, fleeting kiss behind the bleachersome moment Ethan had buried under layers of denial and the expectations of a small town that didn't ask questions about men like him. "What's got you hiding out in Millie's diner?" Lucas asked, his tone gentle but probing. "Cold feet." Ethan laughed, a hollow sound. "It's not that simple." He looked down, the weight of tomorrow pressing against his chest. Sarah was everything he was supposed to want, kind, beautiful, the daughter of a local pastor who'd welcomed Ethan into their family. Their engagement had been a quiet affair, celebrated with polite smiles and a church hall reception planned for tomorrow. But tonight, sitting across from Lucas, Ethan felt the ground shifting beneath him. Lucas tilted his head, his gaze unwavering. "You never were good at simple, Ethan." He reached for the coffee pot between them, pouring himself a cup with the ease of someone who'd never left this place, though Ethan knew he had. Lucas had moved to Philadelphia after graduation, chasing a career in social work, while Ethan stayed behind, building a life that fit the mold everyone expected. "So, tell me," Lucas said, stirring sugar into his coffee, "what's the groom doing in a dive like this the night before his wedding?" Ethan hesitated, the truth clawing at his throat. He could lie, say he was just grabbing a coffee, but Lucas had always seen through him. "I don't know if I'm ready," he said finally, the words spilling out like a confession. "For any of it. The wedding, the life, the expectations." Lucas's expression softened, but there was a spark of something else, hope, maybe, or recognition. "You're not the first guy to feel that way," he said, "but you're the only one I ever thought might actually do something about it." The words hung between them, heavy with history. Ethan remembered the summer after junior year, when they'd spent nights driving aimlessly in Lucas's beat-up Chevy, sharing dreams and fears under a sky full of stars. Lucas had been out, unapologetically himself, while Ethan had hidden behind excuses, terrified of what it meant to feel the way he did. That fear had driven a wedge between them, And when Lucas left for college, Ethan let him go without a fight. Now, with the rain pounding outside and the diner's warmth wrapping around them, Ethan felt that old pull again. Lucas was a stranger and a memory all at once. A reminder of the person Ethan might have been if he'd been braver. "Why are you here, Lucas?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lucas leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Got a call from my mom. She's not doing great, so I came back for a bit. Saw your wedding announcement in the paper." He paused, his eyes searching Ethan's. "Thought I'd see if the Ethan I knew was still in there somewhere." The words hit like a punch, and Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to say he was still that Ethan, the one who'd laughed with Lucas until dawn, who'd felt alive in a way he hadn't since. But tomorrow loomed, and with it, a promise he'd made to Sarah, to her family, to himself. The diner's clock ticked past midnight, and Ethan knew he should leave, but his feet stayed rooted. Lucas's presence was a question he wasn't ready to answer, but couldn't ignore. As the rain slowed to a drizzle, Ethan felt the first crack in the life he'd built, a crack that might just let the truth slip through. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the table where Ethan and Lucas sat. Ethan's coffee had gone cold, but his hands still clung to the mug, as if it could anchor him to the present. Lucas's words that Ethan I knew echoed in his mind, stirring memories he'd locked away for a decade. "You don't get to say that," Ethan said, his voice sharper than he intended. "You left, Lucas. You got out. I stayed here, dealing with everything." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the town, the expectations, the life he'd built to fit in. Lucas didn't flinch. "I didn't want to leave you," he said quietly. "But you made it clear you weren't coming with me. You chose this place, Ethan. You chose to stay hidden." The accusation stung, but Ethan couldn't deny it. He'd been 18, terrified of what it meant to be seen with Lucas. To admit what they'd shared wasn't just a phase. Willow Creek wasn't cruel, but it was small, its judgment subtle but suffocating. Ethan had watched Lucas pack his bags, promising himself he'd move on, that he'd be normal. And he had until tonight. "I didn't have a choice," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "You know how it is here. My parents, the church, Sarah's family, they all expect." He trailed off, unable to finish. The weight of those expectations had shaped his every decision, from his job to his engagement. Sarah was his shield, his proof that he could be the man everyone wanted. Lucas leaned closer, his voice soft but firm. "You always had a choice, Ethan. You still do." His hand rested on the table, inches from Ethan's, and the space between them felt alive with possibility and danger. Ethan's pulse quickened. He wanted to pull away, to run back to the safety of his hotel room. But Lucas's gaze held him. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice raw. "I'm getting married tomorrow. I can't just—" "I'm not asking you to do anything," Lucas interrupted, his eyes steady. "I'm just asking you to be honest. With yourself, at least. Are you happy?" The question cut deeper than Ethan expected. Was he happy? He had a good job, a nice apartment, a fiancée who loved him. But happiness? That was a word he hadn't dared to examine, not when it risked unraveling everything. He thought of Sarah's smile, the way she planned their future with such certainty. He thought of the nights he lay awake, wondering why his heart felt so heavy. "I don't know," he admitted, the words tasting like defeat. "I thought I was. I thought this was what I wanted." Lucas's expression softened, and for a moment, Ethan saw the boy he'd known in high school, the one who'd made him laugh until his sides ached, who'd held his hand in the dark and made him feel like he could be enough. You don't have to figure it all out tonight, Lucas said. But you owe it to yourself to try. The diner door swung open, letting in a gust of cool air and a couple of late-night regulars. Ethan glanced at them, suddenly aware of how exposed he felt. What if someone recognized him? What if word got back to Sarah or her father? Panic crept up his spine, but Lucas's calm presence kept him grounded. Let's get out of here, Lucas suggested, standing and tossing a few bills on the table. Walk with me. Just for a bit. Ethan hesitated, but the thought of staying in the diner, trapped under the weight of his own thoughts, was worse. He followed Lucas outside, the rain now a soft mist that clung to his skin. They walked down Main Street, the town quiet except for the occasional car passing by. Willow Creek was asleep, its storefronts dark, its secrets buried under layers of tradition. They stopped by the old oak tree near the town square, where they'd carved their initials one reckless night a decade ago. Ethan's fingers brushed the rough bark, finding the faint outline of E+L still there, weathered but enduring. You remember that night? Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. We were so stupid, he said, but there was no venom in it. That night, they'd been fearless, drunk on youth and the thrill of something forbidden. They'd kissed under this tree, a clumsy, desperate act that had left Ethan dizzy with want and terror. We weren't stupid, Lucas said. We were honest. For once. Ethan turned to face him, the mist blurring the edges of Lucas's figure. And then you left, he said, the old hurt resurfacing. You didn't even say goodbye. Lucas's jaw tightened. I tried. Ethan. I called. I wrote. You didn't answer. I thought you wanted me gone. The truth was a knife, twisting in Ethan's chest. He'd ignored Lucas's calls, deleted his letters, convinced himself it was for the best. But standing here now, with Lucas so close, he wondered what he'd given up to stay safe. I'm sorry, Ethan said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. I was scared. I didn't know how to be me. Lucas stepped closer, his breath visible in the cool air. You don't have to apologize. Just don't keep running from yourself. For a moment, they stood there, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. Ethan's heart pounded, torn between the life he'd built and the one he'd lost. Tomorrow, he'd stand at the altar, but tonight, under the oak tree, he felt the pull of a truth he couldn't ignore. The mist hung heavy around the oak tree, cloaking Ethan and Lucas in a world that felt separate from Willow Creek's watchful eyes. Ethan's fingers lingered on the carved initials, the rough bark grounding him as his mind spun. Lucas stood close, too close, his presence a reminder of everything Ethan had tried to forget. I can't do this, Ethan said, stepping back, his voice trembling. I'm getting married tomorrow. Lucas, I have a life. I can't just throw it away because you showed up. Lucas's eyes darkened, but he didn't move. I'm not asking you to throw anything away, he said. I'm asking you to stop pretending you're someone you're not. You're not happy, Ethan. I can see it. I've always seen it. The words were a mirror, reflecting a truth Ethan had spent years avoiding. He thought of Sarah, waiting at home, probably finalizing details for the reception. She deserved better than a man who was here, standing under a tree with someone else, questioning everything. But the pull of Lucas was undeniable, a tide dragging him back to a version of himself he'd buried. Let's keep walking, Ethan said, needing to move, to outrun the thoughts closing in. Lucas nodded, and they continued down the street, passing the shuttered hardware store and the barber shop where Ethan's dad used to take him. The town was a map of his life, each corner holding memories of who he'd been and who he'd tried to become. They ended up at the old high school, its brick facade looming in the dark. The football field stretched out behind it, the bleachers where they'd shared that kiss still standing, weathered but intact. Ethan stopped at the chain-link fence, his hands gripping the cold metal. "Why did you come back?" he asked, his voice raw. "Why now?" Lucas leaned against the fence beside him, his shoulder brushing Ethan's. "I told you, my mom's sick. But if I'm honest, I saw your name in that announcement, and I couldn't stay away. I needed to know if you were okay." Ethan laughed, a bitter sound. "Okay. I'm a mess. Lucas. I've spent 10 years trying to be someone I'm not. And now you're here, making me question everything." Lucas turned to face him, his expression earnest. "You don't have to have all the answers tonight. But you can't keep living a lie. Not for Sarah. Not for this town. Not for anyone." The words hit hard, cracking open a truth Ethan had buried under layers of duty and fear. He thought of the nights he'd lain awake, imagining a different life, one where he didn't have to hide, where he could love without shame. But that life felt impossible, a fantasy that didn't belong in Willow Creek. "I love Sarah," Ethan said, more to himself than to Lucas. "She's good, kind. She doesn't deserve this. She doesn't deserve a husband who's not all in," Lucas countered gently. "You're not doing her any favors by pretending." Ethan's grip on the fence tightened, his knuckles white. He wanted to argue, to defend the life he'd built, but the truth was seeping through the cracks. He proposed to Sarah because it was the next step, the expected one. But every time he pictured their future, something felt off, like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong spot. Lucas reached out, his hand hovering near Ethan's before settling on the fence. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he said. "But let me show you something." Curiosity overrode Ethan's hesitation, and he followed Lucas through a gap in the fence, onto the football field. The grass was damp, the air thick with the scent of rain and earth. Lucas led him to the center of the field, where they'd once lain on a blanket, staring at the stars and dreaming of a world beyond Willow Creek. "Lie down," Lucas said, dropping to the ground and patting the space beside him. Ethan hesitated, then joined him, the wet grass soaking through his jacket. Above them, the clouds parted just enough to reveal a sliver of starry sky. "Remember this?" Lucas asked, his voice soft. "We used to talk about getting out, seeing the world. You wanted to design album covers for bands. I wanted to help kids like us, the ones who felt like they didn't belong." Ethan's throat tightened. "I remember," he said. "But dreams like that don't survive in a place like this." "They can," Lucas said, "if you're brave enough to chase them." They lay there in silence, the stars above a quiet witness to the turmoil in Ethan's heart. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his choices, the cost of living a life that wasn't his. Lucas's presence was a lifeline, but also a risk one that could unravel everything. As the night deepened, Ethan knew he couldn't stay here forever. The wedding was hours away, and with it, a decision he wasn't ready to make. But for now, lying beside Lucas, he let himself imagine a world where he could be free. The stars above the football field glimmered faintly, each one a pinprick of light in the vast dark. Ethan lay on the damp grass, his shoulder inches from Lucas's, the silence between them heavy with unspoken truths. The weight of tomorrow's wedding, his promises, his carefully constructed life pressed against his chest. But here, under the open sky, he felt a fleeting sense of freedom. Lucas turned his head, his profile sharp against the night. "You ever think about what might have been?" he asked, his voice soft but piercing. If we'd been braver back then. Ethan's breath caught. He'd spent years shoving those thoughts down, locking them away with the memory of Lucas's touch. But now, with the stars bearing witness, he couldn't lie. Every day, he admitted, his voice barely audible. I wonder what I'd be like if I hadn't stayed. If I'd gone with you. Lucas's hand found his, their fingers brushing in the dark. The contact sent a jolt through Ethan, a reminder of how alive he'd once felt. You can still choose, Lucas said. It's not too late. Ethan pulled his hand away, sitting up abruptly. The grass clung to his jacket, cold and grounding. It is too late, he said, his voice cracking. I'm getting married in 10 hours. Lucas. I can't just walk away from that. From Sarah, from her family, from everything I've built. Lucas sat up too, his eyes searching Ethan's. You're not walking away from them, he said. You're walking toward yourself. There's a difference. The words hit like a wave, threatening to pull Ethan under. He stood, pacing the field, his shoes sinking into the mud. You make it sound so easy, he said, frustration bleeding into his voice. But it's not. You don't know what it's like to live here, to feel like everyone's watching, waiting for you to screw up. Lucas stood, closing the distance between them. I do know, he said, his voice firm. I grew up here too, Ethan. I felt those eyes on me every day. But I chose to leave, to live my truth. And yeah, it was hard, but it was worth it. Ethan stopped pacing, his hands clenched at his sides. And what about Sarah? She loves me. She trusts me. How do I tell her I'm not who she thinks I am? Lucas's expression softened, but he didn't back down. You tell her the truth. It'll hurt, but it's better than living a lie for the rest of your life. You're not just saving yourself. Ethan, you're saving her from a marriage that's not real. The words were a knife, cutting through the fog of Ethan's denial. He thought of Sarah's laugh, her gentle touch, the way she looked at him like he was her future. But he also thought of the nights he'd spent staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in his own skin. Lucas was right, Sarah deserved more than half a heart. I don't know how to do this, Ethan said, his voice breaking. I don't know how to be that person. Lucas stepped closer, his hand resting lightly on Ethan's arm. You don't have to do it alone, he said. But you have to start somewhere. For a moment, they stood there, the night wrapping around them like a cocoon. Ethan's heart pounded, torn between fear and a longing so fierce it scared him. Lucas's touch was a tether, pulling him toward a truth he'd spent years running from. Let's go somewhere, Lucas said suddenly, his voice bright with an idea. One last place. For old time's sake. Ethan hesitated, glancing at his watch. It was nearly 2 a.m. And the rational part of him screamed to go back to the hotel, to sleep and face tomorrow as planned. But the other part, the part that had carved initials in a tree and kissed a boy under the stars, nodded. Where? Lucas grinned, a spark of the boy Ethan had known. The quarry. You remember. Ethan's chest tightened. The quarry was where they'd gone senior year, sneaking out to swim under the moonlight, their laughter echoing off the rocks. It was where Ethan had first realized he loved Lucas, a truth he'd buried the moment it surfaced. They drove in Lucas's rental car, the radio playing soft indie tunes that filled the silence. The quarry was a few miles out of town, a hidden gem surrounded by pines and cliffs. When they arrived, the water gleamed under the moonlight, still and serene. They climbed down to the rocky shore, the air cool and sharp with the scent of pine. Lucas kicked off his shoes, rolling up his jeans. "Come on," he said, wading into the shallow water. "One last swim." Ethan laughed, the sound surprising him. "You're crazy," he said, but he followed, the cold water biting at his ankles. For a moment, they were 17 again, splashing and laughing, the weight of the world forgotten. As they stood in the water, Lucas turned to him, his face illuminated by the moon. "You're still in there, Ethan," he said. "The guy I fell for. He's still there." Ethan's breath hitched, and before he could think, he reached for Lucas, pulling him close. Their lips met, tentative at first, then desperate. A decade of longing poured into a single moment. It was everything Ethan had forgotten he could feel alive, real, whole. But as they pulled apart, reality crashed back. Tomorrow, he would face Sarah, the church, the life he'd promised. And Lucas, standing here in the moonlight, was a choice he wasn't sure he could make. The kiss lingered on Ethan's lips, warm and electric, as he stood in the shallow water of the quarry, the moonlight casting shadows across Lucas's face. His heart thundered, a mix of exhilaration and dread, as the reality of what he'd done settled in. He'd crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed, and the weight of it threatened to pull him under. Lucas's hand lingered on Ethan's cheek, his thumb brushing gently against his skin. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft, searching. Ethan stepped back, the cold water lapping at his calves. "No," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm not okay. I can't do this. Lucas. I'm getting married in a few hours." Lucas's expression didn't waver, but his eyes held a quiet pain. "You can," he said. "You just did. And you felt it. Same as me." Ethan turned away, staring at the dark water, its surface reflecting the stars like a shattered mirror. He wanted to deny it, to say the kiss was a mistake, a moment of weakness. But it hadn't felt like weakness, it had felt like coming home. And that terrified him more than anything. "I'm not like you," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "I can't just be myself. Not here. Not with everyone watching." Lucas waited closer, his voice steady. "You don't have to be like me. You just have to be you. And the Ethan I know isn't the guy who's about to walk down the aisle to please everyone else." The words cut deep, exposing a truth Ethan had spent years burying. He thought of Sarah, her trusting smile, the way she'd planned their wedding with such care. He thought of her father, Pastor James, who'd treated Ethan like a son, and the congregation that had cheered when he proposed. They all saw him as the perfect groom, the good man who'd settled down with the pastor's daughter. But none of them knew the storm inside him, the part that had always belonged to Lucas. "I don't know how to tell her," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "How do I look Sarah in the eye and say I'm not sure? That I might love someone else?" Lucas's hand found his again, gentle but firm. "You start with the truth," he said. "It's messy. It's hard. But it's the only way. For both of you." Ethan pulled his hand away, pacing along the rocky shore. The quarry was silent except for the soft ripple of water and the distant hum of crickets. He felt exposed, raw, like the world could see every crack in his facade. "And what if I lose everything?" he asked. "My family, my friends, my life here." Lucas's eyes softened, but his voice was steady. "You might lose some things, but you'll gain yourself. And that's worth more than you think." Ethan stopped, his breath ragged. He wanted to believe Lucas, to trust that there was a life beyond Willow Creek where he could be whole. But the fear was a weight, heavy and familiar, chaining him to the life he'd built. "Let's sit," Lucas said, gesturing to a flat rock near the water's edge. They sat side by side, their shoulders brushing, the silence between them both a comfort and a challenge. Lucas pulled a small flask from his jacket, offering it to Ethan with a half-smile. "For courage," he said. Ethan took a sip, the whiskey burning his throat. "You always carried this?" he asked, trying to lighten the mood. "Only when I'm back in this town," Lucas said, his smile fading. "It's not easy coming back. Too many ghosts." Ethan nodded, understanding more than he wanted to admit. Willow Creek was full of ghosts' memories of who they'd been, who they could have been. He handed the flask back, their fingers brushing again, and the contact sent a shiver through him. "Tell me about your life," Ethan said, needing a distraction. "In Philly. What's it like?" Lucas leaned back, his gaze distant. "It's good. Hard sometimes, but good. I work with teens mostly, ones who are struggling with who they are. A lot of them are like we were, scared and hiding. I try to be the person I needed back then." Ethan's chest ached. Lucas had built a life that mattered, one that was true to who he was. Meanwhile, Ethan had spent years designing logos for local businesses, smiling at church potlucks, pretending to be someone he wasn't. "You're doing something real," he said quietly. "I'm just existing." Lucas turned to him, his eyes fierce. "You could do something real too, Ethan. You're talented. You're kind. You could be so much more than this town's poster boy." The words were a spark, igniting something in Ethan he hadn't felt in years. Hope. But hope was dangerous, a flame that could burn everything down. He stood, brushing dirt from his jeans, needing to move, to think. "I need to go," he said, his voice tight. "It's late. I have to figure this out." Lucas stood too, his expression unreadable. "I'll drive you back," he said. But Ethan didn't let fear win again. They drove back to town in silence, the radio off, the only sound the hum of the engine and the faint patter of rain. When they reached the hotel, Ethan hesitated, his hand on the door. "Thank you," he said, not looking at Lucas. "For tonight." Lucas's voice was soft. "I'm here, Ethan. Whatever you decide." Ethan nodded, stepping out into the rain. As he watched Lucas's car disappear into the night, he felt the weight of the choice ahead. Tomorrow, he'd face Sarah, the altar, the life he'd promised. But tonight, for the first time in years, he felt the possibility of something more. The hotel room was too quiet, the hum of the air conditioner a poor substitute for the night's earlier chaos. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, his damp clothes clinging to his skin, the taste of Lucas's kiss still lingering. His wedding suit hung in the closet, pristine and mocking, a symbol of the life he was supposed to step into in just a few hours. He checked his phone 3:17 a.m. A text from Sarah glowed on the screen. "Can't wait to be your wife tomorrow. Love you." Guilt twisted in his gut, sharp and unrelenting. She had no idea where he'd been, who he'd been with, or the storm raging inside him. He typed a reply, then deleted it, his hands shaking. What could he say? That he'd spent the night with a man who'd once held his heart. That he wasn't sure he could stand at the altar and mean the vows. Ethan stood, pacing the small room, his reflection in the mirror catching his eye. He looked like a stranger, tousled hair, shadowed eyes, a man unraveling. He thought of Lucas's words at the quarry, "You'll gain yourself." But who was he, really? The dutiful son, the perfect fiancé, or the boy who'd loved Lucas under the stars? He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Memories of Sarah flooded in here, a laugh at their first date. The way she'd planned their wedding with such joy. She was his best friend, his safe harbor. But love, the kind that set your soul on fire. That was what he'd felt tonight, with Lucas's lips on his, with the past rushing back like a tidal wave. His phone buzzed again, this time a call. He hesitated, then answered, expecting Sarah's voice. Instead, it was his sister, Claire, her tone sharp with worry. Ethan, where are you? Sarah's freaking out. You didn't show up to the rehearsal dinner, and you're not answering texts. Ethan's stomach dropped. He'd forgotten the rehearsal, too caught up in Lucas's orbit. I'm at the hotel, he said, his voice hoarse. I just needed some time. Claire's silence was heavy. Ethan, what's going on? You sound like you're falling apart. He wanted to tell her everything, the kiss, the quarry, the truth he'd buried for a decade. But Claire, though kind, was part of Willow Creek, part of the world that expected him to be the man he'd pretended to be. I'm fine, he lied. Just nerves. I'll be there tomorrow. You better be, she said, but her voice softened. Sarah loves you. You know. Whatever's going on, talk to her. She deserves that. The call ended, and Ethan's guilt deepened. Claire was right, Sarah deserved the truth, but the thought of saying it out loud made his chest tighten. He imagined her face, the hurt in her eyes, the way her family would look at him. But he also imagined a life where he didn't have to hide, where he could love without fear. He pulled out his laptop, opening a blank document. Writing had always been his way of untangling his thoughts, even if he never shared it. His fingers hovered over the keys, then began to type, the words spilling out like a confession. I've spent my life running from who I am. I thought I could be the man everyone wanted, son, fiancé, friend. But tonight, I remembered what it feels like to be alive, to love without shame. Lucas showed me that, and now I'm terrified. Terrified of hurting Sarah, of losing everything, but also of losing myself if I don't choose truth. He stopped, his hands trembling. The words were raw, unfiltered, a mirror to his soul. He saved the document, then closed the laptop, his heart pounding. Dawn was creeping closer, and with it, the moment he'd have to decide. He thought of Lucas, probably back at his mom's house, waiting for Ethan to make a choice. He thought of Sarah, asleep in her childhood bedroom, dreaming of their future. Both of them deserved more than a man torn in two. Ethan stood, crossing to the window. The town was still, the streetlights casting a soft glow on the wet pavement. He imagined walking away, leaving Willow Creek, starting over somewhere new. The idea was exhilarating and terrifying, a leap into the unknown. His phone buzzed again, a photo from Sarah, taken months ago at the lake. She was laughing, her hair catching the sunlight, and Ethan was beside her, smiling but distant. He stared at the photo, his heart aching. He loved her, in his way, but it wasn't the love she deserved. He typed a message to Lucas, "Can we talk? Before the wedding. Please." He hit send before he could overthink it, his pulse racing. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing: he couldn't keep running. As the first light of dawn broke over Willow Creek, Ethan felt a shift inside him. The fear was still there, but so was something near resolve. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, he was ready to ask the questions. Dawn painted Willow Creek in soft pinks and golds, but Ethan felt no warmth as he stood outside the hotel, waiting for Lucas. His text had been answered with a simple "Meet me at the park. 6 a.m. Now, as the town stirred awake, Ethan's nerves were a live wire. his heart caught between dread and determination. The park was quiet, the swings swaying gently in the breeze. Lucas sat on a bench near the pond, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun. Ethan approached, his steps heavy, the weight of the day ahead pressing down. In a few hours, he was supposed to be at the church, smiling for photos, promising forever. But first, he needed to face Lucas and himself. "You came," Lucas said, standing as Ethan neared. His voice was steady, but his eyes held a cautious hope. "I had to," Ethan said, shoving his hands in his pockets. "I can't go through with today without understanding this. Us." Lucas nodded, gesturing to the bench. They sat, the space between them both intimate and vast. The pond reflected the sky, its surface rippling with the morning breeze. Ethan's throat tightened, the words he needed to say stuck like stones. "I kissed you last night," Ethan began, his voice low. "And it felt right. But it also feels like I'm betraying everything. Sarah, her family, this town. I don't know how to reconcile that." Lucas's gaze was steady, unwavering. "You're not betraying anyone by being honest," he said. "You're betraying yourself by pretending you can live a life that's not yours." Ethan's chest ached. He thought of the document he'd written, the confession he'd poured onto the page. It was the truest thing he'd ever done, and yet it terrified him. What if I tell Sarah and she hates me? What if I lose everyone? Lucas leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Some people might walk away. That's their choice. But the ones who matter will stay. And you'll be free to be you, Ethan. Not the version this town expects." Ethan looked out at the pond, the water catching the light like a promise. He imagined telling Sarah, watching her face crumple, her trust shattered. But he also imagined a life where he didn't have to hide, where he could love Lucas or someone like him without fear. The thought was a lifeline, fragile but real. "I need to talk to her," Ethan said finally, the words heavy with resolve. "Before the wedding. I owe her that." Lucas's expression softened, a mix of pride and pain. "That's brave," he said. "Hard, but brave." Ethan shook his head. "I don't feel brave. I feel like I'm about to ruin everything." Lucas reached out, his hand resting on Ethan's knee. "You're not ruining anything. You're choosing truth. That's the hardest thing you'll ever do." They sat in silence, the morning unfolding around them, birds chirping, the distant hum of a lawnmower, the world waking up to a day Ethan wasn't ready for. He thought of Sarah, probably getting her hair done, her dress laid out, her heart full of hope. The guilt was a weight, but so was the lie he'd been living. "I don't know what happens after this," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I tell her, if I walk away, where do I go?" Lucas's hand squeezed his knee, then let go. "You don't have to know yet. Just take the first step. The rest will come." Ethan nodded, his eyes stinging. He stood, brushing off his jeans, the decision settling like a stone in his chest. "I need to see her now," he said, "before I lose my nerve." Lucas stood too, his expression unreadable. "I'll be here," he said. "Whatever you need." Ethan drove to Sarah's parents' house, his hands gripping the steering wheel. The streets of Willow Creek were waking up, neighbors waving as they watered lawns or walked dogs. It was the life he'd known, the one he'd tried to fit into, but it felt like a costume now, one that no longer fit. Sarah was in the backyard, sitting on a porch swing, her hair half pinned for the ceremony. She smiled when she saw him, but it faltered as she took in his expression. "Ethan, what's wrong?" He sat beside her, his heart pounding. "We need to talk," he said, his voice trembling. "About us." "About me." Sarah's eyes widened, her hands clutching the swing's chains. "You're scaring me," she said, but her voice was steady, bracing for impact. Ethan took a breath, the words he'd rehearsed in his head spilling out. "I love you, Sarah. You're my best friend. But I haven't been honest with you. Or myself. I don't think I can marry you." Her face paled, her eyes searching his. "What are you saying? Is there someone else?" Ethan's throat tightened. He thought of Lucas, the quarry, the kiss that had changed everything. "It's not about someone else," he said, though it was only half true. "It's about me. I've been hiding who I am, and I can't keep doing it. Not to you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. Are you saying you're gay?" Her voice was soft, not accusing, but the word hung between them, heavy and real. Ethan nodded, the admission like a weight lifting and falling all at once. "I think so. I've known for a long time, but I was too scared to face it. I'm so sorry, Sarah. You deserve better." She was quiet for a long moment, her tears falling silently. Then she reached for his hand, her touch gentle. "I wish you'd told me sooner," she said. "But I'm glad you're telling me now." The weight of her forgiveness was almost too much. Ethan squeezed her hand, his own tears falling. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said. "I thought I could be what you needed." Sarah's smile was sad but kind. "You can't be what I need if you're not yourself," she said. "Go find that, Ethan. For both of us." The porch swing creaked under Ethan and Sarah, the morning air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine. Sarah's hand was still in his, her touch a quiet anchor as tears streaked her face. Ethan's heart ached with guilt, but also with a strange relief the truth was out, raw and irreversible. "I need to tell my parents," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her tears. "They'll be disappointed, but they'll understand. Eventually." She looked at Ethan, her eyes searching. "What will you do now?" Ethan's throat tightened. He hadn't thought beyond this moment, beyond the confession that had torn his world apart. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just know I can't keep pretending." Sarah nodded, squeezing his hand before letting go. "You're braver than you think," she said. "Go find what makes you happy, Ethan. You deserve that." He stood, his legs unsteady, and hugged her tightly, memorizing the warmth of her embrace. "I'm so sorry," he whispered again, but she shook her head, silencing him. "Don't be," she said. "Just be you." Ethan left her on the swing, the weight of her words carrying him back to his car. The church was filling with guests by now, the wedding that wouldn't happen a ticking clock in his mind. He drove to the park, where Lucas was still waiting, sitting on the same bench by the pond. Lucas stood as Ethan approached, his eyes scanning Ethan's face for answers. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft. Ethan nodded, though his heart was a storm. "I told her," he said. "I couldn't marry her, Lucas. Not when I'm in love with someone else." The words hung between them, heavy and true. Lucas's eyes widened, a flicker of hope breaking through his guarded expression. "You mean that?" he asked. Ethan stepped closer, his voice steady for the first time all night. "I do. I've loved you since we were kids, Lucas. I was just too scared to admit it." Lucas's smile was small but radiant, like the first light of dawn. He reached for Ethan's hand, pulling him close, and this time, Ethan didn't pull away. Their lips met again. Softer now. A promise rather than a question. The kiss was a beginning. A step into a world Ethan had only dreamed of. They sat by the pond, hands entwined, as the town woke around them. Ethan knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Willow Creek would talk. His parents would struggle, and he'd have to rebuild a life from the ground up. But for the first time, he felt ready to face it, with Lucas by his side. "I'm thinking about leaving," Ethan said, his voice tentative but sure. "Maybe Philly. Somewhere I can start over. Be myself." Lucas's eyes lit up. "Philly's got room for you," he said. "I know a guy who'd love to show you around." Ethan laughed, the sound lighter than he'd felt in years. "I might take him up on that." They stayed by the pond until the sun was high, talking about the future tentative plans, dreams they'd buried, a life they could build together. Ethan thought of the document on his laptop, the confession that had started it all. He'd share it with Lucas someday, when the wounds were less raw, when the world felt less fragile. As they stood to leave, Ethan glanced at the pond, its surface now bright with sunlight. He saw his reflection, not the stranger from the hotel mirror, but someone new, someone honest, someone whole. The groom who was set to marry had spent his last night in the arms of a forgotten classmate, and in doing so, had found himself. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Ethan wasn't running. He was walking, hand in hand with Lucas, toward a life that was his own. And that, he knew, was worth everything.